Okay, so some interesting stuff to talk about here today on this wonderful Wednesday, September 24th, really on the defensive side of the ball primarily for the Indianapolis Colts. In fact, only the defensive side of the ball we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk about Laiatu Latu. There's been so much talk from the fan base about the Colts pass rush following this game against the Tennessee Titans, or really the lack thereof, right? But Pro Football Focus coming out with their numbers, coming out and singing the praises of Laiatu Latu. He is currently Pro Football Focus's number one rated pass rusher in the NFL through 3 weeks of action. Now, albeit he's only played 2 of those 3 games, but nonetheless, that has to count for something, right? And he's the Colts' second highest rated defender in week 3, behind only one Kenny Moore. And obviously, Kenny Moore had a fantastic game to the eye, right? Like just a very clear, you're watching the game and Kenny Moore popping off the screen. Yet Laiatu Latu maybe not as much. And I have to admit, when I saw Pro Football Focus's grade on Laiatu Latu, I was kind of shocked because much like you, I did not see much out of this Colts pass rush in that game. Like they ended up with 4 sacks, but there was not a single moment where I felt like they were, or really a single stretch where I felt they were disruptive in that game. And I came here after the game, and I was pretty critical of the pass rush as a whole and sort of called Laiatu Latu out and said, listen, pal, you're a guy that needs to step up. You're the one that's expected to lift this room. But obviously seeing PFF's grades sort of had me wondering if my eyes were lying to me because, you know, when you watch a game on TV, you're sort of watching it in its, how can I put this, in its totality. Right? So it's not like you're watching for a specific player the entire time. You're kind of watching the whole thing. And then, of course, you have that TV view, which is from the side. So guys are subbing in, they're subbing out. And it's not like you know every single guy that's in on every single play. And if you do, your attention span, I guess, is far better than mine. But, you know, you're just watching the game as it goes and you take it in as you take it in that moment. So you're not going to be able to see every single detail of every single player on the initial watch. That's my point. And because of that, I went back and watched all of Laiatu Latu's snaps in this game. And I have to admit, I come here today with a very different view of the Colts pass rush, and more specifically, a very different view of Latu. And I think you're going to find it very interesting what it is that I found when I rewatched his snaps. And then, of course, Colts signed Mike Hilton in the wake of Kenny Moore getting that calf injury against the Titans. He's now facing a multi-week absence. Shane Steichen says there's no timetable. Ian Rappaport initially reported it was 2 to 3 weeks. The Colts did not put Kenny Moore on IR, which means they don't think it's going to be at least 4 weeks. So that 2 to 3 week timetable does seem about on the money from Ian Rappaport. And in the wake of that, again, Mike Hilton now on the practice squad for the Indianapolis Colts. He's either 31 or 32, but a really good player in the league for the majority of his career. Obviously, well, I don't say obviously. I can't take for granted whether or not you know this. He played with Luana Rumo in Cincinnati, so we're going to talk about the addition of him and how he fits into the team. And then that'll wrap up the episode, and we'll, get back on with our merry days. But before we do all that, you know what it is? I got to introduce the show. My name is Justin. This right here is the Round the Bench Colts podcast. As always, ask anyone watching and enjoying the show, go ahead, shoot a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Of course, subscribe if you want to be a part of the journey. We're on our way to 4,000 subscribers over here on the YouTube channel. We're actually pretty close. So if you keep coming back, enjoying what it is that you're hearing, or perhaps it's your first day here, and again, you're enjoying what it is that you're hearing, hit that subscribe button. Help me hit the goal. And also, never miss an episode again. Of course, audio listeners, can't forget about you. Leave a 5-star review. Let the people know how much you're enjoying what it is that we're doing over here. As I always say, you guys are the most important thing to this show's growth. We've come a long way together. Some of you have been here since before 1,000 subscribers. So whether it's, liking, subscribing, leaving that 5-star review, maybe sharing it with a friend of yours that's a Colts fan, or sharing it on Reddit, whatever it is that you do, or just sitting here and watching, totally fine too. That helps the channel as well. I appreciate that type of stuff. Of course, if you plan to engage in the comments section, you know what it is. Be civil with one another, right? You don't know what the person on the other end of the keyboard's going through today. So if you disagree on anything, just take it as an opportunity to have a discussion. I always say that, but you guys are always so good about making this kind of, a safe space is not exactly something that is something that I would normally say. But you guys do a pretty good job of making sure that, no one feels like they're going to get berated in the comment section for sharing their opinion. So I appreciate that as well. But without further ado, let's get back into the regularly scheduled program. Let me stop asking you for things and instead give you a little bit of value, right? So let's start with the pass rush with Laiatu Latu. And I want to start by setting the stage with a little bit of context before getting into kind of what it is that I found. As I said, of course, top rated pass rusher per PFF in the NFL headed into this week. And the gut reaction to hearing that type of thing is to sort of dismiss them as like the analytics nerds, right? And be like, the guys at PFF, like, yeah, we looked at this statistic and the A dot of this and all that stuff, right? And they kind of come up with this thing. And then you have guys like Sagan Olaby being rated as the best run stopper in the NFL last year, right? Like, that's how this type of stuff works. But then you do kind of look at the rest of the top five, and the guys are in order: Myles Garrett, Aiden Hutchinson, Micah Parsons, and Bryce Huff. And three of those four guys are the best that this league has to offer. So there has to be some level of merit to what Pro Football Focus is doing there, right? Now, with that said, you look at the Colts as a whole. They went into Sunday last in the league in pass rush win rate as a team. They come out of the game now 29th, so still amongst the bottom in the league, but they moved up a little bit. They had 4 sacks total in that game, none of which recorded by Laiatu Latu. And the Titans did have backups at right guard, at right tackle, and the large majority of Latu's snaps were against that backup tackle. Now, all of that out of the way, here's the good news about what it is that I saw when I went back and watched the tape. When Latu was lined up one-on-one with a guy, primarily number 72 at right tackle, he was winning those matchups almost every single time. Like, he was giving that dude all he could handle and then some. Number 72 was is probably begging for the starting right tackle to come back after being against Laiatu Latu. You go back and watch it yourself. Latu was giving him the business overall. That being said, the one issue with it is that I did find myself the entire time watching it saying, well, okay, he's winning the matchup, but he's just not winning the matchup fast enough. Now, listen, I don't know enough about defensive line play to know why that would be or how to fix that type of thing. But I will say this. The names I mentioned before that were in the top 5 with Laiatu Latu: Myles Garrett, Aiden Hutchinson, Micah Parsons, Bryce Huff. You look at their snap counts throughout the course of the year. Myles Garrett, on average, is on the field for the Cleveland Browns over 70, 80+% of the time. Other than week 2, they got blown out. But even you go back to last year, those snap percentages hold true for Myles Garrett. Aiden Hutchinson, over 90% of the snaps over the course of this year for the Detroit Lions. Micah Parsons, of course, is working up to speed with the Packers. They traded for him very, very close to the start of the season, so he had to kind of learn the defense and get acclimated. But week 3, 77% of the snaps. It's been going up every single week, and you can only assume that's going to continue with all the money that they paid him. Bryce Huff, the only outlier in the list, but he's behind Nick Bosa. I guess not anymore because Bosa, he tore his ACL or whatever. Well, he's behind Nick Bosa and a first-round pick in this year's draft, Michael Williams. Now, you look at that at the Colts in week 3, and as opposed, in contrast to guys like Myles Garrett and Aiden Hutchinson and Micah Parsons, the Colts had an even split at defensive end, essentially across the board. I mean, you're talking anywhere from 50 to 50% of the snaps for each of them, right? Kwity Paye, Tyquan Lewis, Samson Ebukam, and Laiatu Latu, practically the same amount of snaps. Like, you're talking one guy with 38, one guy with 39, right? And Latu had the most of them all, but it was to the tune of like 3 snaps. So that's basically an even split down the middle. Now, I know Latu working back from a hamstring injury. In week 1, he had 67% of the snaps, which is more, by the way, than he had in any game last year, -1, where he also had 67% of the snaps. But there's a drive in this game in the second quarter, and the Titans start on the 9-yard line, and it's the first drive of the game where you really look at the Titans offense and saying they're starting to get into a little bit of a rhythm, particularly Cam Ward. He starts the drive with some time. He's able to stay on his spot. He's able to really be comfortable in the pocket without much disruption there. It's kind of the key word that I used once or twice already in the episode, so I'll roll with that one again. Now, ultimately, that drive stalls out. Lou Anarumo does a good job of manufacturing some pressure with Zaire Franklin. He has him on some sort of stunt where he like comes through the middle, and he ends up in Cam Ward's face up the middle of the offensive line, and that drive stalls out. But the one thing I noticed on that drive, the most comfortable drive offensively up to that point in the game for the Titans, lo and behold, who's not on the field for that entire drive? As it turns out, Laiatu Latu is off the field for that drive, and instead you have Kwity Paye and Samson Ebukam. Now, in fairness to Kwity Paye, I thought he looked pretty darn good throughout the course of this game. Ebukam, on the other hand, brought absolutely nothing whatsoever out there as a pass rusher. So my question, I guess, is, and this kind of comes back to Latu, why do you have Ebukam on the field as much as you do right now? Like, what's your allegiance to him as a player right now? As we know, he's coming off of a torn Achilles. His contract is expiring at the end of the year, and presumably with JTT being drafted in the second round of this year's draft, despite the fact he's been on the reserves basically the entire season, uh, and Latu being a first-round pick in his own right, you have to assume that Samson Ebukam is not part of the long-term plan for this team. So my question becomes, well, okay, if all those things are the case and he's not producing, why even use him at all? Now, I, of course, don't mean literally you're not going to use him at all because guys have to come off the field. They need a breather. And that's when a guy like Ebukam comes in. But I do look at Latu in this game particularly, and he was so far and away on tape better than Samson Ebukam that you do look at the amount of snaps he played versus the guys I mentioned earlier in Myles Garrett and Aiden Hutchinson and Micah Parsons, who are up again 80, 90%. Is it when you look at Latu not getting any sacks and not finishing, right? Is it as simple as him just needing more at bats? And if so, why not give them to him? Now, there may be a very good answer to that question. And in all fairness, Smooth Lou Gabagoo, he's forgotten more about the defensive side of the football than I'll ever dream to know. Okay. So let's just be very clear in that. Like, I'm going to be transparent on that front. But at the same time, I do find myself asking, what exactly is it that a guy in Samson Ebukam really brings that Latu doesn't? Like, he's no more of a run stopper, I don't think. And I think if you're the Colts right now, you got to let Latu loose. And maybe that's the plan. We'll see. Again, coming off the hamstring injury this week. But I think if you give him 75, 80% of the snaps out there, maybe that allows him to get into a little bit more of a rhythm, a little bit more of a flow state, right? Like, constantly being on the field, off the field, on the field, off the field. I don't know. To me, number one, obviously, how are you supposed to get into a rhythm? But two, it just kind of seems like a misuse of his talent. So we're going to see how that progresses. But my overarching takeaway from watching Latu's tape this week is, well, it was promising, quite frankly. And I did find myself asking, why wasn't he on the field more? The only reasonable answer seems to be the hamstring. But we're going to see this week against the Rams if that changes, right? Because Kwity Paye, Samson Ebukam, Tyquan Lewis, these are not technically bad football players. Ebukam, he looks like one right now, but up until this point in his career, for the Colts, he's been a pretty solid pass rusher for us. But these are not the guys who are going to elevate this unit as a whole, right? That's Laiatu Latu who's going to do that. He's the only one with any level of upside, really, when you think about him, right? Obviously, Kwity Paye, when you talk about those other guys, he's the other one. But, I mean, he's been around since, 2018, and it hasn't happened yet. So Latu's the guy you look at and say he's the one who could bring this unit to another level, and they have to give him the chance to do it. And they verse the Rams and Matt Stafford this week, and Matt Stafford, not a runner by any stretch of the imagination. If I'm to take an early guess as to what it is that we'll see this week, and I'll monitor it and I'll report back to you guys after the game, I think Latu's snap count does go to 70+%, and I think he ends up with his first sack of the season against Matt Stafford. So we'll see how that goes. But I kind of wanted to give that to you guys because it's a change of tune of where I was after the game, and I just thought you would find some of that stuff interesting. Now, to Mike Hilton, after I just quickly, gosh, my nose, dude, allergies, I just can't get over them. Oh, gosh. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Mike Hilton. Interesting when you look at a guy like Mike Hilton on the Colts practice squad, just the difference a few years makes in the NFL. It wasn't that long ago that Mike Hilton and Kenny Moore were considered the two best slot corners in the game of football. And now they're on the same team. Mike Hilton was with the Bengals from 2021 to 2024. and they ultimately ended up releasing him in favor of essentially younger players. And then he signs with the Dolphins this offseason, plays a little bit in the preseason, and then once again gets released for kind of the same reasons, in favor of younger guys, or at least that's how it was presented. But the reality, if we're to be completely fair and objective, is that the Dolphins secondary was so banged up, so poor on paper headed into the season, that if you're Mike Hilton, not making that roster isn't exactly a great look for where it is that you're at in this point in his career. And obviously, corner is a position that generally doesn't age particularly well, but at the same time, this isn't exactly the same thing as them getting Xavier Howard, who has not really been himself since the year 2022, right? Hilton was still playing at a relatively solid level last season with the Bengals. And again, he had a little bit of preseason action. So it's not like he's like coming off the couch here for the Indianapolis Colts. Now, while Kenny Moore is out, obviously, the goal would be for him to take over in the slot, if not this week, next week. And, you'd like him to be able to do a lot of the same things, particularly against the run. Like Mike Hilton, say whatever it is that you want about his diminished ability in coverage at this juncture in his career. He's still a great tackler, right? But you're not going to really find someone in free agency. And this is kind of the problem the Colts are running into. It's week 3 of the regular season. All the corners who can cover are already on a team. Like, those types of guys don't just grow on trees. But again, Hilton, a leader, a veteran. He knows Lou Anarumo's defense very, very well. He's never going to cheat you on effort. It's just unfortunate the Colts have had such bad luck at this position. They also worked out some dude named Troy Pride at corner. So obviously they're looking for some answers here. What I'm more so curious about with Mike Hilton, because again, as we know, he's the signing is clearly to fill in for Kenny Moore. But what about after Kenny Moore comes back? Is there any sort of plan for Mike Hilton then? Because he's certainly not going to play on the outside. I can tell you that much. And hopefully at that point, Jalen Jones has already worked his way back from that hamstring injury. The Colts, by the way, and then Jalen Jones, that you want to talk about a guy who we're not talking about much, and the Colts can really use his presence right now. Jalen Jones is that guy. I think some of us have forgotten just how solid he is as an outside corner in this league, particularly when you move him down a peg and he's not your number 1 guy. He's your number 2 guy. Look, I'm excited to see him come back. But at the same time, hamstring injuries, notoriously pesky. And of course, he was dealing with it throughout training camp and then injured it in a game, right? That he was able to play. So he missed practice time and then came into a game and then hurt it again. So we don't know, right? Exactly. Jalen Jones obviously getting put on IR. That leaves him out until at least week 4, but we don't know if the absence is going to extend beyond that. We'll see. But all I know is that you look at a game this week against the Rams, and they need some sort of answer. And to kind of bring this thing back around, you once again do look at the pass rush. Them stepping up would help out this banged up secondary tremendously. And Lord forbid, knock on wood, Charvarius Ward were to go down in this game. I mean, my goodness, you're talking about a situation that could be an absolute crisis. This Rams team, number one, they're one of the best teams in the NFL, period, right? Just flat out. And if not for a blocked kick, they would have knocked off the Philadelphia Eagles, who have hardly lost in the past 12 months. And that is what it is. But they're also a bit unfair when it comes to the wide receiver position. I mean, you have Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams out there. It just doesn't get much scarier than that, particularly when you have a banged up corner room. So these are going to be the things that we're watching this week, but I just wanted to bring some of that to you to give you a little bit more perspective on Latu, and then, of course, to speak to Mike Hilton, because how could I not? And that's an episode. My name's Justin. This right here was the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. Like, subscribe if you have not yet, and as always, go Colts.